Hey guys, and welcome to Stage 6, Lesson 86. Let's get started. Obvious. Obvious. Something that's obvious is clear. You can immediately realize it or recognize it. For example, if I look outside and see that it's sunny and people are wearing shorts and t-shirts, it's obvious that it's hot outside. On the other hand, if it's snowing and everybody's wearing jackets and hats, so it's obvious that it's cold outside. It's clear, you can immediately tell. Give me a sentence with the word obvious, please. Give me a sentence with the word obvious, please. For example, he has a job interview and he's all red in his face. It's obvious he's nervous, for example. Do small children sometimes say they aren't tired when they obviously are? Do small children sometimes say they aren't tired when they obviously are? Yes, small children. Yes, small children sometimes say they aren't tired when they obviously are. Why? Because they don't want to go to bed. Ache, ache, toothache, toothache, stomachache, stomachache, earache, earache, headache, headache. So ache is a continuous physical pain. So something that hurts for a while. And typically we combine it with the word for the part of your body which hurts. So your head hurts, it's a headache. In your ear it hurts, it's an earache. Your tooth hurts, it's a toothache. Your stomach hurts, it's a stomachache, etc. What is an ache? What is an ache? An ache is a continuous physical pain. What might you get if you ate too much? What might you get if you ate too much? If I ate too much, I might get a stomachache. Where should you go if you get toothache? Where should you go if you get toothache? If I get toothache, I should go to see a dentist. What kind of things give you a headache? What kind of things give you a headache? The kind of things that give me a headache are too much work, not enough sleep, too many people, etc. Rule, confuse, confuse. The word rule in this context can have two meanings. One meaning of the word rule is the rules of a game. For example, the rules of football are you have 11 players on each side and they are trying to get the ball into the gate by kicking it. That's the basic rules. And another meaning of the word rule can be the same as lead when you have, for example, a king. A king leads the nation. A king rules the nation. He's the ruler of the nation. He's their boss. And confuse, when you don't understand something, it confuses you. You are confused with things you don't understand. Or it can also be to mix two things up. For example, you have a word walk and you have a word work. They sound quite similar, so you might confuse the two. Who was the last person to rule your country? Who was the last person to rule your country? The last person. The last person to rule my country was probably some Habsburg monarch. Do you understand the rules of football? Do you understand the rules of football? Yes, I understand. Yes, I understand the rules of football. Do the rules of English grammar sometimes confuse you? Do the rules of English grammar sometimes confuse you? No, the rules. No, the rules of English grammar never confuse me. Do you find computers confusing? Do you find computers confusing? No, I don't. No, I don't find computers confusing. Would you be confused if I suddenly walked out of the room for no reason and didn't come back? Would you be confused if I suddenly walked out of the room for no reason and didn't come back? Yes, I'd be confused. Yes, I'd be confused if you suddenly walked out of the room for no reason and didn't come back. Ought, ought. Ought is the same as should, but it is followed by the infinitive with to. For example, instead of saying I should go now, we can say I ought to go now. It's really better if you remember it as ought to rather than just ought, because you always use it with to. I ought to do this, I ought to do that. What can we say instead of should? What can we say instead of should? We can say ought to instead of should. Give me an example, please. For example, I'm hungry, I ought to eat something. When we borrow money, ought we to pay it back as soon as possible? When we borrow money, ought we to pay it back as soon as possible? Yes, when we borrow. Yes, when we borrow money, we ought to pay it back as soon as possible. What ought we to do before crossing the road? What ought we to do before crossing the road? Before crossing the road, we ought to look both ways. Do you think children ought to be allowed to go to bed whenever they want? Do you think children ought to be allowed to go to bed whenever they want? No, I don't. No, I don't think children ought to be allowed to go to bed whenever they want. Rough, rough, smooth, smooth, surface, surface, seasick, seasick, roughly, roughly. Let's start with seasick. When you are on a boat on the sea and there are big waves, you might start feeling seasick and vomit overboard. Surface is the top cover of things. For example, when you are walking on the ground anywhere, you are walking on the surface of the ground. Or for example, this is the surface of my phone. Also, the top of a table is the surface of table, and so on. Smooth and rough can be opposites. So for example, the surface of this phone is smooth. On the other hand, the surface of the back of a stegosaurus, for example, is rough. It's not smooth, it's rough. And another meaning of the word rough can be, if I say the weather is rough, it means the weather is bad, stormy, rainy, windy, and so on. And another meaning can be when you say I'm feeling rough. If I say I'm feeling rough, I mean I'm not feeling very well. And rough can also be, for example, used with things like sports, like rugby is a rough sport, or MMA is a very rough sport. And one more meaning of the word rough, or it can be used as roughly, and when you use it like that, roughly, it means like probably or give or take. For example, if I say it's roughly 15 degrees outside, it means it's plus minus 15 degrees centigrade outside. If I say the population of Brno is roughly 400,000, it means probably 400,000. Is the surface of this phone rough? Is the surface of this phone rough? No, the surface. No, the surface of this phone isn't rough, it's smooth. And note one thing, when the sea is not rough, we can say the sea is rough, we don't say it's smooth, we say the sea is calm. When you travel by boat, do you prefer the sea to be rough? When you travel by boat, do you prefer the sea to be rough? No, when I travel by boat, I don't prefer the sea to be rough, I prefer the sea to be calm. Why? Because a rough sea can make us seasick. If someone tells you that they're feeling rough, what do they mean? If someone tells you that they're feeling rough, what do they mean? If someone tells me that they're feeling rough, they mean they're not feeling very well. Roughly how many people would you say there were in the Czech Republic? Roughly how many people would you say there were in the Czech Republic? I'd say there were roughly 11 million people in the Czech Republic. Do you like rough weather? Do you like rough weather? No, I don't. No, I don't like rough weather. Which do you think is the roughest sport one can play? Which do you think is the roughest sport one can play? I think the roughest. I think the roughest sport one can play is rugby, for example. Ground, ground, level, level, underground, underground, railway, railway, ground floor, grounds, grounds. Okay, so that's a lot of words. Here, let's start with ground. The word ground usually means the surface of land. So it's the surface of land on which you walk. Now, the surface of land is also the level of ground. And below the level of ground is the underground. And we can use the underground also to call for the underground railway. Railway are trains. Underground railway, for example, in Prague, there's an underground railway. Another meaning of the word ground can be, for example, a football field is a football ground. And with the word ground, we also use it when we talk about floors of a building. So typically, in the Czech Republic, we have first floor is the first floor above ground. And the one on the ground is called ground floor. And the word grounds in plural is the area of some place. For example, the university grounds is the area of university. One more meaning of the word level. The word level can also be balanced. So for example, a table can be level. If it's not level, it means that one of the legs of the table is slightly lower or higher, and the table is not level and you have to put something under one of its legs. What do we usually mean by the word ground? What do we usually mean by the word ground? We usually mean the surface of land by the word ground. Are there any shops in this town built below the level of ground? Are there any shops in this town built below the level of ground? Yes, there are. Yes, there are some shops in this town built below the level of ground. Where? For example, on the main station. When a table is not level, what must we do? When a table is not level, what must we do? When a table is not level, we must put something under one of its legs. Has this town got an underground railway? Has this town got an underground railway? No, this town. No, this town doesn't have an underground railway. Speaking for Brno here. What's on the ground floor of this building? What's on the ground floor of this building? There's a reception on the ground floor of this building. Where's the biggest football ground in this town? Where's the biggest football ground in this town? The biggest football ground in this town is near Lužanky. Are the grounds of some famous old buildings in this country open to the public? Are the grounds of some famous old buildings open to the public in this country? Yes, the grounds. Yes, the grounds of some famous old buildings are open to the public in this country. Educate, educate, educated, educated. Educate is a verb, educated is an adjective. An educated person is a person who continued their studies until a high level. And educate as a verb is quite similar to teach. How can parents start educating their children before they go to school? How can parents start educating their children before they go to school? Parents can start educating their children before they go to school by teaching them to read and write. What do we mean by an educated person? What do we mean by an educated person? By an educated person, we mean somebody who has continued their studies to a high level. Making a suggestion. So they want me to tell you about 4 common ways in which we can make a suggestion. It can be shall we, such as shall we go to the cinema? It can be let's, such as let's go to the cinema. It can be how about or what about, such as how about going to the cinema or what about going to the cinema. And why don't we, such as why don't we go to the cinema. Tell me 4 common ways in which we can make a suggestion, please. Tell me 4 common ways in which we can make a suggestion, please. 4 common ways. 4 common ways in which we can make a suggestion are: shall we go to the cinema? Let's go to the cinema. How about going to the cinema? And why don't we go to the cinema? Order. Order. Order is when you tell someone to do something. For example, open the window. Typically, people give orders, for example, to their dogs, like sit down is an order for dog. Or soldiers get orders from their officers. And they want me to tell you about the imperative. So the imperative is when you give orders. For example, open the window, exclamation mark. That's imperative. When we want to say something stronger than just a suggestion or even order someone to do something, we use the imperative. In English, the imperative is very easy. We just use the infinitive without to. For example, we say go away. For negative imperative, we put the word don't before the infinitive. For example, we say don't go away. How do we make the imperative in English? How do we make the imperative in English? We make the imperative in English by using the infinitive without to. Give me an example, please. For example, give me an example. And how do we make a negative imperative? How do we make a negative imperative? We make a negative imperative by putting the word don't before the infinitive. Give me an example, please. Don't give me an example. And that's it for this lesson. I thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.